The tavern sat at the edge of the village like a tired sentinel, its stone walls thick with moss and centuries of sorrow. The sign above the door had long since faded, the painted letters barely visible against the weathered wood. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of burned tallow and sour ale, and the patrons kept their voices low, as if speaking too loudly might summon something from the darkness beyond the windows. Elara moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her apron stained from the evening's work, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She had worked at the tavern for 3 years now, ever since her parents died of fever and left her with nothing but their debts. The work was hard and the pay meager, but it kept her fed and gave her a roof over her head in the small room above the kitchen. The regulars knew her face, but rarely spoke to her beyond ordering their drinks. She had learned to read the silence of men who came to forget their troubles, to move through the shadows without drawing attention. It was safer that way. The Transylvanian mountains bred a particular kind of wariness in people, a knowledge that some things were better left unacknowledged. It was on a Thursday evening in late autumn when she first saw them. The door opened with a gust of cold wind that made the candles flicker and die, plunging half the tavern into deeper shadow. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the entrance. The man who entered was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. He wore a long black cloak that moved around him like living smoke, and his face was pale as moonlight, sharp and angular, with eyes that caught the remaining candlelight and reflected it back like a wolf's. His presence filled the room with a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. But it was the child who walked beside him that made Elara's breath catch in her throat. The boy appeared no more than 8 or 9 years old, with the same pale skin as his companion, the same dark hair that fell in waves past his collar. He wore clothes that seemed from another century, a velvet jacket with silver buttons and a white shirt with lace at the collar. His face was beautiful in an unsettling way, too perfect, too still, like a porcelain doll that had been given the semblance of life but not quite enough to pass for human. The man moved to a table in the far corner, the darkest part of the tavern, and the boy followed silently. They sat and the man gestured to Elara with one long pale finger. She approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Up close, she could see that neither of them cast a proper shadow in the candlelight. The boy's eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she saw something in them that made her chest tighten. Not malice or hunger, but a profound, aching loneliness that seemed older than the mountains themselves. 2 glasses of red wine, the man said, his voice like silk drawn across stone. His accent was thick, archaic, the kind of speech pattern that belonged in history books. Nothing else. Elara nodded and hurried back to the bar, aware of every eye in the tavern following her movement. Old Gregor, the tavern keeper, poured the wine with shaking hands. "Do not speak to them," he whispered, his breath reeking of garlic and fear. "Do not look at them directly. Serve them and move away. Do you understand?" She nodded, though questions burned in her mind. She had heard the stories, of course, everyone in the region had. The castle that loomed on the mountain above the village, ancient and terrible, where no light ever shone in the windows. The lord who had lived there for longer than anyone could remember, who came down to the village only rarely, always at night, always alone. But she had never heard of a child. When she brought the wine to their table, her hands were steady despite her racing heart. She set the glasses down carefully, avoiding the man's gaze. But the boy was watching her. She could feel it, and when she glanced at him, she saw his lips move, forming words that made no sound. The man noticed her attention, and his expression darkened. The child looked away quickly, his small hands folding in his lap with a practiced submission that broke something in Elara's chest. She returned to her work, but throughout the evening, she found herself watching them. The man drank his wine in slow, deliberate sips, his eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a predator. The boy sat perfectly still, his own glass untouched, his gaze fixed on the table before him. He never moved unless his companion gestured to him, and even then his movements were small, careful, as if he had learned long ago that drawing attention brought pain. The other patrons gave their table a wide berth, some making signs against evil when they thought the tall man wasn't looking. Conversations resumed, but they were muted, strained, and several people left earlier than usual, hurrying out into the night as if the cold outside was preferable to the cold within. Around the tavern, whispers began to circulate in voices so low they were almost inaudible. Elara caught fragments as she passed between tables. The old blacksmith, Stefan, his face weathered and scarred from years at the forge, leaned close to his companion, and muttered about the time his grandfather had seen the Count riding through the village on a black horse, decades ago, looking exactly as he did now. Not a day older, not a single hair different. His companion crossed himself and ordered another drink. At another table, two farmers argued in hushed tones about whether the child was real or some kind of enchantment, a puppet made of shadow and moonlight. One insisted he had seen the boy's chest rise and fall with breath, while the other claimed no such thing moved in that small frame, that it was as still as death itself. Elara wiped down tables and refilled glasses, her movements automatic while her mind raced. She had lost count of how many times her eyes drifted back to that dark corner, to the strange pair that seemed to exist in a separate space from the rest of the world. The boy never reached for his wine. He never shifted in his seat or looked around the room with the curiosity a child should have. He simply sat, his hands folded, his eyes downcast, as if he had learned long ago that the world held nothing for him but rejection and fear. She thought of her sister Anna, of how people had stared at her in the streets, how they had spoken around her as if she were not there, as if her deafness made her invisible. Elara had seen that same look of careful erasure on people's faces when they encountered Anna, that deliberate turning away, that refusal to acknowledge her humanity because it was easier than learning to communicate differently. The boy in the corner wore that same invisible weight, that same aura of someone the world had decided not to see. It was near midnight when the man finally stood, his cloak settling around him like wings. The boy rose as well, moving with that same careful precision. As they walked toward the door, Elara found herself moving closer, drawn by an impulse she could not name. The boy turned his head slightly, just enough to look back at her, and his hands moved in a quick, furtive gesture. His fingers formed shapes in the air, a language she recognized with a shock that ran through her entire body. Sign language. The boy was using sign language. Her sister Anna had been born deaf, and Elara had learned to speak with her hands before she learned to speak with her voice. Anna had died 2 winters ago, taken by the same fever that claimed their parents, and Elara had not used those hand shapes since, but she remembered them, every one, carved into her memory by love and loss. The boy's message was simple, desperate, executed with the precision of someone who had practiced these movements for centuries, in the hope that someday, somewhere, someone might understand. "Help me," his hand said. "Please. I have been alone so long." Then they were gone, the door closing behind them with a finality that seemed to seal something away. The tavern erupted in nervous chatter, people crossing themselves and calling for more ale to calm their nerves. But Elara stood frozen, staring at the closed door, her mind racing. The boy could not speak, or perhaps he was not allowed to speak, and somehow, impossibly, he knew sign language. He had reached out to her in the only way he could, with a plea that bypassed words entirely. Old Gregor grabbed her arm, pulling her back to the bar. His face was flushed with drink and fear. "You will forget what you saw tonight," he hissed. "Do you hear me, girl? That is the Count. That is Dracula himself. And that thing with him, whatever it is not your concern. The Count comes to the village perhaps twice a year, always to this tavern, always with that silent boy. No one knows where the child came from, or why the Count keeps him. Some say he is a captive, some say he is cursed, some say he is not a child at all but some ancient demon wearing a child's face. Whatever the truth, it is not for common folk like us to question. We serve, we look away, and we survive. That is how it has always been. But she could not forget. Not the boy's eyes, ancient and sad beyond measure. Not the careful way he moved, like someone who had learned to make himself as small and silent as possible. Not the desperate plea his hands had formed in the air. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Elara served drinks and cleaned tables with mechanical efficiency, but her thoughts were elsewhere, circling around those few seconds when the boy's hands had spoken to her. She had seen the hunger in his gesture, not for blood or flesh, but for connection, for someone who could understand him. It was the same hunger she had seen in Anna's eyes when people walked past her in the street without acknowledging her greetings, when they spoke about her as if she were not standing right there. That night, lying in her small room above the tavern, Elara stared at the ceiling and thought about her sister. Anna had been fearless despite her silence, laughing with her eyes and speaking with her hands, finding joy in a world that often treated her as less than human because she could not hear its sounds. She had taught Elara that communication was more than words, that sometimes the deepest truths could only be spoken in silence. And that boy, that strange, pale, silent boy, who sat beside one of the most feared figures in all of Transylvania, he had spoken to her in that same silent language. He had asked for help. Elara pressed her hands against her chest, feeling the steady thump of her heart, the warmth of her living blood. She thought of Anna's grave in the churchyard, of how her sister had died without anyone but Elara truly knowing her, truly seeing her, and she thought of the boy's eyes and the centuries of loneliness she had seen there. The wind howled outside her window, carrying with it the scent of pine and coming snow. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, and the sound was answered by another and another, until the mountains echoed with their lonely calls. Elara listened to them and wondered if the boy could hear them too. From whatever dark room he inhabited in that vast castle on the mountain, did he stand at a window and listen to creatures that at least had each other, that could call and be answered, or was he locked away in some lightless chamber, with no window to the world and no voice to call out into the darkness? She did not sleep that night. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of grey and rose, she had made her decision. It was foolish, it was dangerous. It might very well cost her her life. The stories about Castle Dracula were not mere superstition. People who ventured too close to those ancient walls were never seen again. The Count's power was absolute, his cruelty legendary, his patience for mortal interference non-existent. But she could not walk away from that silent plea. She could not leave him alone in his darkness, not when she had the means to reach him, to speak with him in the language of hands and hope. Anna would have done the same. Anna, who had never let fear silence her, who had insisted on being seen and heard, even when the world tried to erase her. Anna, who had taught Elara that the most dangerous thing was not reaching out to those in darkness, but walking past them as if they did not exist. She would find a way. Somehow she would find a way to speak to the Count's mute son again. She would acknowledge his existence, his suffering, his desperate need to be understood, even if it meant walking into the shadow of the castle itself, even if it meant facing the Count's wrath, because some silences were too profound to ignore, and some pleas too desperate to abandon. The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist, and Elara rose from her bed with a sense of purpose that felt both terrifying and right. She did not know what she would do or how she would do it, but she knew, with a certainty that lived deeper than reason, that the boy's message had found the one person in all of Transylvania who could answer it. And she would, whatever the cost. The Count and his silent companion returned to the tavern exactly 1 week later, as if drawn by some invisible calendar that measured time in ways mortals could not comprehend. Elara had spent those 7 days in a state of nervous anticipation, rehearsing in her mind what she might do, how she might communicate with the boy without drawing the Count's dangerous attention. She had practiced her signs in the privacy of her room, her fingers forming words and phrases she had not used since Anna's death, the movements coming back to her like muscle memory, like breathing. When the tavern door opened and that familiar cold swept through the room, Elara felt her heart leap into her throat. The conversations died instantly. The Count entered with his customary dark magnificence, his cloak billowing behind him, and the boy followed 2 steps behind, his small figure almost swallowed by the shadows that seemed to cling to his father like loyal servants. They took the same table in the corner. The Count gestured, and Elara approached with the wine already prepared, her hands trembling slightly as she set the glasses down. She kept her eyes lowered, playing the part of the obedient servant, but as she turned to leave, she let her hand brush near the boy's line of sight and formed a single sign. "Hello?" The boy's eyes widened just for a fraction of a second, and she saw something flare in their dark depths. Recognition, hope, fear. His small hand twitched as if he wanted to respond, but the Count's gaze was on them both, cold and assessing, and the boy went perfectly still again. Elara retreated to the bar, her pulse racing. She had made contact. The boy had seen, had understood, had wanted to answer. It was enough. It had to be enough. Throughout the evening, she found small moments to pass near their table, always with some legitimate reason, always careful to appear natural. Each time she formed a quick sign where only the boy could see. "Are you all right? What is your name? I want to help." The boy watched her with an intensity that was almost painful, his eyes following her movements around the tavern, with the desperate attention of someone starving for connection. The Count, for his part, seemed preoccupied with his own thoughts, his gaze distant and cold. He drank his wine slowly, occasionally glancing around the tavern with an expression of such profound contempt that several patrons left their tables and fled into the night. He treated the boy with an odd mixture of possession and neglect, sometimes placing a hand on the child's shoulder with what might have been affection or ownership, other times ignoring him completely, as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Near midnight, as they prepared to leave, Elara made a bold decision. She approached their table ostensibly to collect the glasses, and as she reached for the boy's untouched wine, her hands moved in a rapid sequence. Tomorrow night. The old stone bridge near the village. I will be there. Please come. The boy's breath caught audibly, a small gasp that made the Count's head turn sharply. Elara kept her face neutral, her movements steady as she gathered the glasses and retreated. Behind her, she heard the Count's voice, low and dangerous, speaking to the boy in a language she did not recognize, something ancient and harsh that seemed to make the candle flames dance and writhe. When she glanced back, the boy's head was bowed, his small form rigid with what might have been fear or shame. The Count rose, sweeping his cloak around him, and the boy followed, but not before his eyes met Elara's one last time. In that brief moment, she saw his answer. He would come. Somehow he would find a way. The next night, Elara left the tavern an hour before midnight, telling old Gregor she needed to visit her sister's grave, that she had forgotten to bring flowers on the anniversary of Anna's death. It was a lie, but a believable one, and Gregor, already deep in his cups, waved her away with barely a glance. The old stone bridge was a 20-minute walk from the village, spanning a narrow gorge where a mountain stream ran cold and fast over smooth rocks. It was a place people avoided after dark, not because of any specific danger, but because it marked the boundary between the village lands and the wilder country beyond, the forests and mountains where wolves hunted and darker things were said to dwell. Elara stood at the center of the bridge, wrapped in her worn cloak, her breath misting in the cold air. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape, illuminating the path that wound up toward the castle. She could see it in the distance, a massive silhouette against the star-filled sky, its towers reaching toward the heavens like accusations, its windows dark and empty. She waited, listening to the rush of water below and the whisper of wind through the pines. Minutes passed, then an hour. The cold seeped through her cloak and into her bones, and doubt began to creep into her mind. Perhaps he could not come. Perhaps the Count kept him locked away, or watched him too closely, or had discovered their brief communication and punished him for it. Perhaps she had been foolish to think a creature like that, if he was indeed a creature, and not simply a cursed child, could escape the watchful eye of Dracula himself. She was about to give up and return to the village when she heard it. A sound so soft it was almost lost in the night, the whisper of footsteps on stone. She turned and saw him emerging from the shadows at the far end of the bridge, moving with that same careful precision she had observed in the tavern. He was alone. The boy stopped a few feet away from her, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart ache. Up close, away from the tavern's dim light, she could see him more clearly. His skin was not merely pale but luminous, as if lit from within by cold moonlight. His features were delicate and perfect, untouched by time or hardship, and his eyes held centuries of sorrow, compressed into a face that should have known only childhood innocence. Elara's hands moved slowly, carefully forming the signs. "Hello? My name is Elara. What is your name?" The boy's face transformed. Joy, pure and unguarded, flooded his features, making him look for just a moment like the child he appeared to be. His hands flew up, trembling with eagerness and long-suppressed need. "Mihai," he signed. "My name is Mihai. I have not spoken to anyone in 300 years. Elara felt tears prick her eyes at the stark simplicity of his confession. 300 years, 3 centuries of silence, of isolation, of being unseen and unheard, even when standing in rooms full of people. She signed back, her movements gentle. "I am sorry. I am so sorry you have been alone." Mihai's hands continued, the signs spilling out of him like water from a broken dam. "I was not always like this. I was mortal once. I was my father's son. I was 7 years old when he turned me, when he made me into what I am now. But something went wrong. The transformation took my voice, but not my life, trapped me in this body, but gave me no power, no strength, only endless time and silence. My father says I am a failure, a mistake, proof that even immortality can create imperfection. He keeps me because I am his blood, but he despises what I am. I am neither mortal nor vampire, neither living nor dead. I am nothing." Elara shook her head fiercely, her signs emphatic. "You are not nothing. You are Mihai. You are a person, a soul, someone who deserves to be seen and heard and valued. Your father is wrong." Mihai stared at her as if she had spoken in some impossible language, as if the concept of his own worth was so foreign he could not quite comprehend it. His hands moved hesitantly. "Why did you reach out to me? Everyone else fears me. They look through me or turn away. Even the servants in the castle avoid my eyes. Why are you different?" "My sister was deaf," Elara signed. "She was born without hearing, and lived in a world that treated her as if she were broken, as if her silence meant she had nothing to say. But she taught me that silence is not emptiness, that those who cannot speak with their mouths often have the most important things to say. When I saw you signing in the tavern, when I saw your plea for help, I could not turn away, I could not let you remain invisible." Mihai's composure cracked. His small shoulders began to shake, and though no sound emerged from his throat, his face contorted with the effort of suppressed sobs. Tears red as blood began to stream down his pale cheeks, and Elara realized with a shock that even his tears were not quite human. She stepped forward instinctively, wrapping her arms around the boy, holding him as he wept silently against her shoulder. His body was cold, so cold it hurt to touch him, but she did not let go. They stood like that for long minutes, the mortal girl and the cursed child, connected by the simple human need to be acknowledged, to be held, to be told that one's existence mattered. When Mihai finally pulled back, his face was streaked with red, but his eyes held something they had not held before, a spark of life, of possibility, of hope that perhaps the world was not entirely cruel. "Can you come again?" he signed. "Can we meet like this? Please. I have so much I want to say, so many years of words trapped inside me." Elara nodded. "Every week. I will come to this bridge every week at this time. We can talk for as long as you can safely be away." "What if my father discovers us?" Mihai signed, fear flickering across his features. "He is not kind to those who defy him. He would hurt you. He might kill you." Elara's hands moved with a confidence she did not entirely feel. "I understand the risk, but some things are worth risking everything for. You deserve to have someone to talk to, Mihai. You deserve to be treated like a person, not a possession or a mistake. I will not abandon you." Mihai stared at her with an expression that was almost reverent. "You are either the bravest person I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both." Elara smiled. "My sister used to say the same thing about me. She was usually right." They talked for another hour, standing on the bridge under the watchful moon. Mihai told her fragments of his story, how he had been born in the castle centuries ago, when his father was still partly human, still capable of love and tenderness. How the transformation had been meant as a gift, an escape from mortal death, but had instead become a prison. How he had watched the world change around him while remaining forever frozen, forever silent, forever 8 years old in body, while his mind grew ancient with loneliness. Elara told him about Anna, about her parents, about her life in the village. She told him about the small joys she found in daily existence, the way sunrise painted the mountains gold, the taste of fresh bread, the sound of rain on the tavern roof. Things he had forgotten or never properly experienced, things that connected him to the mortal world he had lost. When they finally parted, with Mihai slipping back into the shadows toward the mountain path and Elara returning to the village, something had shifted in both of them. Mihai walked with his head slightly higher, his steps a fraction less burdened, and Elara felt the weight of Anna's absence lift just slightly, replaced by a new purpose, a new connection that felt both terrifying and right. She did not know what she had begun. She did not know that in the castle high above, the Count stood at a window watching the bridge, his expression unreadable, his ancient mind turning over this unexpected development. She did not know that her compassion had set in motion events that would challenge everything she believed about monsters and humanity, about damnation and redemption, about the power of simple kindness in the face of centuries of darkness. All she knew was that she had made a promise to a lonely child, and she intended to keep it, whatever the cost might be. The meetings became a ritual, a secret ceremony of connection in a world that demanded isolation. Every week, Elara made her way to the stone bridge, and every week Mihai emerged from the shadows to meet her. They talked for hours, their hands moving in the moonlight, weaving conversations that spanned centuries and seasons, bridging the impossible distance between mortal and immortal, between the warmth of human life and the cold stillness of the undead. Mihai began to change. It was subtle at first, visible only to someone who looked closely. He held himself differently, less like something trying to disappear and more like someone who had remembered he deserved to occupy space in the world. When he signed, his movements became more animated, more expressive, infused with personality that had been suppressed for so long it had almost been forgotten. He smiled sometimes, a small, careful smile that transformed his too-perfect face into something achingly human. He told her stories about the castle, about the vast empty halls where his footsteps echoed endlessly, about the library filled with books in languages both living and dead, about the crypt where his father spent the daylight hours in death-like sleep. He spoke of servants who came and went over the decades, always fearful, always careful, never to acknowledge his presence beyond what was absolutely necessary. He described the endless procession of nights, each one identical to the last, a grey monotony of existence without purpose or connection. But he also told her about moments of beauty, the way moonlight looked on fresh snow, the sound of wolves singing to each other across the mountains, the feeling of wind against his face when he stood on the castle ramparts, small things that sustained him through the centuries, tiny anchors to a world that had otherwise rejected him. Elara, in turn, shared the details of her mortal life. She told him about the regulars at the tavern, their quirks and stories, painting pictures of ordinary human existence that Mihai drank in with desperate thirst. She brought him small gifts, things she thought might please him, a wildflower pressed between pages of paper, a smooth riverstone, a drawing she had made of the village at dawn, objects that meant nothing to most people, but which Mihai treasured as if they were priceless relics. One night, nearly 2 months into their meetings, Mihai arrived at the bridge with an unusual urgency in his movements. His signs were rapid, almost frantic. My father knows, I am certain of it. He has been watching me more closely, asking questions about where I go, what I do. He does not forbid me from leaving, but his silence is more dangerous than any prohibition. He is planning something. Elara felt cold fear grip her heart, but she kept her hands steady. What will you do? I do not know, Mihai signed. Part of me wants to stop coming here, to protect you from whatever he might do. But the thought of returning to that silence, of losing this, losing you, it is unbearable. You have given me something I thought was lost forever. You have given me proof that I still exist, that I matter to someone. I cannot give that up. I will not. Then we continue, Elara signed, but we must be more careful. Perhaps we should meet less frequently or in different places. Mihai shook his head vehemently. No. If I am to be punished, let it be for something worth the cost. These nights with you are the only thing that makes eternity bearable. I would rather face my father's wrath than surrender them. They talked deep into the night, and when they parted, Elara carried a heavy weight of foreboding. She knew the stories about Count Dracula, about his legendary cruelty, and his absolute authority over everything within his domain. She had heard tales of people who had displeased him, found drained of blood and left as warnings, or simply vanishing without a trace, swallowed by the darkness that surrounded his castle like a living thing. But she also knew that some things mattered more than safety. Some connections were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve. Anna had taught her that. Anna, who had refused to be diminished by a world that wanted to ignore her, who had insisted on living fully and loudly despite her silence. The following week, Mihai did not come to the bridge. Elara waited for 3 hours, her worry growing with each passing minute. The night was colder than usual, the wind carrying the scent of coming snow, and the shadows seemed deeper, more menacing. She told herself there could be innocent explanations. Perhaps he had been unable to slip away. Perhaps there were visitors at the castle. Perhaps he was simply being cautious. But deep in her bones, she knew something was wrong. She returned to the village with a growing sense of dread that made sleep impossible. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. She went through the motions of her work at the tavern, serving drinks and cleaning tables, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every conversation with Mihai, every sign he had made, looking for clues she might have missed. That evening, just as twilight was painting the sky in shades of purple and grey, a figure appeared at the tavern door. Not the Count or Mihai, but a woman Elara had never seen before. She was ancient, bent with age, wrapped in layers of dark wool, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of a century or more of life. Her eyes, though, were sharp and clear, missing nothing. The woman approached the bar where Elara stood, her movements slow but deliberate. She gestured for a cup of hot wine, and when Elara brought it, The old woman's gnarled hand closed around her wrist with surprising strength. "You are the one," the woman said in a voice like dried leaves. "The one who speaks with the cursed child." Elara's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "I do not know what you mean." The old woman made a dismissive sound. "Do not play foolish with me, girl. I am Margareta. I was a servant at the castle for 40 years before my age made me useless to them. I know what goes on in that cursed place, and I know what you have been doing." Elara glanced around quickly, but no one was paying attention to them. She lowered her voice. "Is he all right? Mihai? Is he safe?" Margareta's expression softened slightly. "He lives, if you can call his existence life, but the Count has confined him to the castle. He cannot leave the walls until further notice. The master says the boy has been neglecting his duties, spending too much time away from home. But those of us who have served the Count know what such words mean. It is punishment, girl. Punishment for finding something the Count did not give him permission to have." "What will happen to him?" Elara asked, fear making her voice shake. "That depends on you," Margareta said. "The Count is not like other creatures of his kind. He is ancient beyond measure, and his thoughts move in patterns we cannot comprehend. But I have seen him with the boy over the years. There is something there beneath the cruelty, a remnant of what he once was, perhaps, a father's love twisted by centuries of darkness. He could destroy the child utterly if he wished, but he has not. He keeps him close, punishes him, but does not end him. I think in his way he wants the boy to be strong, to be worthy of his dark gift, and your kindness, your attention. It challenges his view of what the boy should be." "What are you saying?" Elara asked. "I am saying that the Count knows about you. He has known from the beginning. Nothing happens in his domain without his awareness. He allowed the meetings to continue because he wanted to see what would happen, what effect mortal compassion would have on his failed creation. But now he has seen enough. Now he will test you both. Test us how?" Margareta released Elara's wrist and took a slow sip of her wine. "The Count has sent me with a message. You are invited to the castle. Tomorrow night at midnight, you are to present yourself at the main gates. If you do not come, the boy will be punished severely for his disobedience. If you do come, you will face the Count himself, and whatever judgment he chooses to render." Elara felt her blood turn to ice. "And if I refuse to play his game at all, then the boy suffers for it, and you will never see him again. The Count will make certain of that." Margareta paused, studying Elara's face with those sharp old eyes. "You care for him, truly care for him, not out of pity or curiosity, but genuine feeling. I can see it written on your face. That is good. The boy needs someone to care, someone to fight for him. God knows no one else ever has." "Will the Count kill me?" Elara asked quietly. Margareta shrugged. "He might. He might turn you. He might do worse things than death, or he might do nothing at all. The Count's mind is not like ours. But I will tell you this. In all my years serving in that castle, I never once saw him show mercy to anyone who did not first show courage. He respects strength, even in mortals, especially in mortals, perhaps, because it is so rare that they display it in his presence." The old woman finished her wine and stood preparing to leave. She paused at the door and looked back at Elara one final time. "The boy's room is in the eastern tower, 3 floors up. If you survive your meeting with the Count, you might be allowed to see him. He has spoken of you, you know. In the limited ways he can communicate with those of us who do not understand his hand language. He draws your name in the dust on windowsills. He sits and stares in the direction of the village for hours. You have become the center of his world, girl. Do not fail him now." Then she was gone, vanishing into the evening crowd as if she had never been there at all. Elara stood frozen, her mind reeling. She had been summoned to Castle Dracula. Tomorrow night, she would walk into the very heart of darkness, would face one of the most dangerous creatures in all of Europe, would put herself completely at the mercy of something that knew no mercy. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to run, to flee the village and never look back, to save herself while she still could. But she thought of Mihai, alone in his tower room, drawing her name in dust with small pale fingers. She thought of his joy when they talked, the way he had come alive under the simple gift of attention and kindness. She thought of his tears, red as blood, when he had whispered through his signs that she had made him feel real again, made him believe that his existence mattered. She thought of Anna, and what her sister would have done in her place. By the time old Gregor called last round and began closing the tavern for the night, Elara had made her decision. She would go to the castle. She would face the Count. She would not abandon Mihai to his lonely darkness. no matter what it cost her. She had made a promise to a child who had known nothing but broken promises for 300 years, and she intended to keep it, even if keeping it meant walking willingly into the domain of death itself. That night, she barely slept. She lay in her small room and watched the moonlight track across the ceiling, counting the hours until midnight tomorrow. She thought about everything that might happen, all the ways it could go wrong, all the horrors the Count might inflict. But she also thought about Mihai's smile, about the light that came into his ancient eyes when she signed hello, about the possibility that her compassion might matter, might make a difference, might prove that even in the darkest places, connection and kindness could still take root and grow. When dawn finally came, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elara rose from her bed with a strange sense of calm. She had chosen her path. Whatever came next, she would face it with the courage Anna had taught her, the courage to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves, to speak for those who had no voice, to fight for the simple truth that every soul, no matter how cursed or broken, deserved to be seen and valued and loved. She spent the day preparing as best she could, putting her affairs in order, writing a letter to be found if she did not return. And when the sun finally set and the moon rose over the mountains, she put on her warmest cloak, crossed herself at the village church, and began the long walk up the mountain path toward Castle Dracula and whatever fate awaited her there. The path to Castle Dracula wound through ancient forest, where the trees grew so thick that moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. Elara walked with steady steps, despite the fear that coiled in her stomach like a living thing. The night was alive with sounds, the hoot of owls, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush, and beneath it all, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. The castle loomed larger with each step, a massive edifice of stone and shadow that seemed to have grown from the mountain rather than been built upon it. Its towers reached toward the sky like accusing fingers, and its walls bore the scars of centuries, weathered by wind and rain and time itself. No light shone in any window, no smoke rose from any chimney. It looked less like a dwelling and more like a tomb, a monument to everything the mortal world feared and rejected. The main gate stood open, as if she had been expected, as if her arrival was so certain that locks and bars were unnecessary. Elara paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, to run while she still could. But she thought of Mihai, and she stepped through the gates into the courtyard beyond. The courtyard was vast and empty, paved with stones worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. Dead vines clung to the walls, and in the center stood a fountain that had long since run dry, its basin filled with fallen leaves and the bones of small animals. The air here was colder than the forest, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the season and everything to do with the absence of life, of warmth, of hope. The massive doors of the castle proper swung open soundlessly, revealing a great hall lit by guttering torches that cast dancing shadows across walls hung with ancient tapestries. Elara entered, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The hall was furnished in a style from centuries past, heavy wooden furniture carved with intricate designs, suits of armor standing like silent sentinels, and everywhere the pervasive sense of abandonment, as if the castle had been frozen in time and left to decay slowly in the darkness. "Welcome," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a voice like silk and iron, cultured and cruel, carrying the weight of centuries. "You have courage, mortal girl, or perhaps merely foolishness. The two are often difficult to distinguish." Count Dracula materialized from the shadows at the far end of the hall. He moved with inhuman grace, seeming to glide rather than walk, his presence filling the space with tangible menace. Up close in the flickering torchlight, Elara could see him clearly for the first time. His face was sharp and aristocratic, handsome in a way that transcended human beauty and became something else, something terrible and magnificent. His eyes glowed with an inner light, red as fresh blood, and when he smiled, his teeth were white and sharp as daggers. "You know who I am," he said, though it was not a question. "I do," Elara replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "You are Count Dracula, lord of this castle, father to Mihai." The Count's expression flickered, something dark and complex passing across his features at the mention of his son's name. "Ah, yes, Mihai, my greatest failure and my most persistent reminder of the limitations even immortality cannot overcome. You have been meeting with him, speaking to him in ways I cannot, teaching him to hope. He stepped closer, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Elara held her ground, though every fiber of her being wanted to flee. Do you know what you have done, girl? Do you understand the danger of giving hope to something that was meant to exist without it? Hope is a poison to creatures like us. It makes the endless nights unbearable. It creates desire where there should only be acceptance. You have disrupted 300 years of equilibrium with your compassion. I have treated him like a person, Elara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I have acknowledged his existence. I have given him what everyone deserves, to be seen and heard and valued. If that is a crime in your eyes, then I am guilty. The Count laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. Such conviction, such righteous certainty. You stand in my hall, utterly at my mercy, and you dare to lecture me about morality. I could kill you with a thought. I could drain every drop of blood from your veins and discard your body where it would never be found. I could turn you into something like me, damned to walk the night forever, and you would beg me for death long before I granted it. Then why have you not? Elara asked. Why summon me here if only to threaten me? You could have killed me at any time these past months. You could have stopped the meetings. You allowed them to continue. Why? The Count's eyes narrowed, and for a moment something ancient and terrible looked out from behind them. Because I wanted to see if it was possible. I wanted to see if my failure of a son could be transformed by mortal kindness, if the thing I could not accomplish through power and discipline could be achieved through something as simple and pathetic as compassion. And do you know what I discovered, girl? I discovered that you have done more for him in 2 months than I have managed in 3 centuries. You have made him want to exist. You have given him a reason to endure, and that realization fills me with something I have not felt in a very long time. Doubt. He turned away from her, moving to stand before the great fireplace where no fire burned. I turned him when he was dying of fever. He was 7 years old, and he was my only child, the last remnant of a time when I was something more than what I am now. I could not let him die. I thought immortality would be a gift, that he would become powerful and eternal, a fitting heir to my dark legacy. But the transformation failed. It took his voice, trapped him in a child's body, gave him immortality without any of its strengths. He can die from sunlight or a stake through the heart, but he cannot grow, cannot change, cannot even speak. He is a mockery of what he should have been, a constant reminder of my failure as both a father and a creature of the night. The Count's voice held something Elara had not expected. Pain, grief, the echo of a father's love twisted by centuries into something unrecognizable, but still, somehow, present. I have kept him with me out of duty and guilt. I have provided for him, protected him, but I have never been able to look at him without seeing my own inadequacy reflected back at me. And so I have treated him as a servant, a possession, anything but what he truly is, my son, the last piece of my humanity, trapped and suffering because I was too arrogant to accept that death might have been the kinder choice. Elara felt something shift in her understanding. The Count was not simply a monster. He was a father who had made a terrible choice and had spent 300 years living with the consequences. His cruelty toward Mihai was not merely sadism, but the twisted expression of guilt and self-loathing, the lashing out of someone who could not bear to face what he had done. He does not blame you, Elara said softly. Mihai, he has never spoken ill of you. He is lonely and he is suffering, but he does not hate you. He only wants to matter to someone, to be seen as more than a mistake. The Count turned back to her, his expression unreadable. And you think you can give him that? You, a mortal girl with nothing to offer but fleeting warmth and inevitable death. What happens when your kindness runs its course, when you realize that he will never grow, never change, never be anything but what he is now? What happens when you age and die, and he remains eternal and unchanged, with only the memory of your brief compassion to sustain him through the centuries? Will your gift not become the cruelest torture of all? Elara met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps. But is a brief moment of genuine connection not better than an eternity of complete isolation? Is it not better to have been loved, even temporarily, than to have never been loved at all? You kept him alive for 300 years, but you never gave him a reason to want that life. I may only have a few decades left, but I can give him what you cannot. I can give him proof that his existence matters, that he is worthy of care and attention, that he is more than the sum of his limitations. The Count stared at her for a long moment, and in his ancient eyes she saw something shift. The red glow dimmed slightly. and behind it she caught a glimpse of the man he had been once, before the darkness claimed him utterly. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish," he said finally. "But I find myself unwilling to destroy something that has brought my son more peace than I have ever managed to provide. You may continue your meetings with him. You may visit this castle when you wish. But understand this, mortal. I am watching. I am always watching. And if I perceive that your influence is causing him harm rather than healing, if I believe you are using him for your own purposes, or leading him toward hope that will only devastate him when you inevitably disappoint, I will end you. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly enough that you will beg me to finish it. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elara said. The Count gestured toward a staircase at the side of the hall. "His room is in the eastern tower, 3 flights up. He has been confined there since your last meeting, as punishment for his disobedience. You may go to him now. Speak with him. Give him whatever comfort you believe you can provide. But remember, girl, in this castle, I am absolute. I am the law and the judge and the executioner. Cross me at your peril." Elara nodded and moved toward the stairs, her legs shaking with relief and residual fear. She had survived. More than survived. She had gained the Count's permission, however grudging, to continue seeing Mihai. As she climbed the winding stairs, she heard the Count's voice one last time, softer now, almost vulnerable. "Tell him," the Count said. "Tell him that his father remembers what it was like to be human. Tell him that some part of me, buried deep beneath the centuries of darkness, is glad he has found someone who sees him as I can no longer bear to do." Elara paused on the stairs and looked back. The Count stood in the great hall, a solitary figure surrounded by shadows and the ghosts of his long existence. For just a moment, he looked less like a monster and more like what he truly was, a father who had made a terrible choice and had been paying for it ever since. "I will tell him," Elara said quietly, and then she continued climbing, her heart lighter than it had been since this entire journey began. The eastern tower was cold and drafty, with narrow windows that looked out over the mountains. Mihai's room was at the very top, a small circular chamber furnished simply with a bed, a desk, and shelves of books. He sat on the floor by the window, his small form silhouetted against the moonlight, and when Elara opened the door he turned toward her with an expression of such pure joy and disbelief that it nearly broke her heart. His hands flew up in rapid signs. "You came. You are alive. I thought he would kill you. I thought I would never see you again." Elara crossed the room and knelt beside him, taking his cold hands in her warm ones. "I made you a promise," she signed. "I told you I would not abandon you. Did you think I would break that promise?" Mihai's eyes filled with red tears. "Everyone breaks their promises to me eventually. Everyone leaves. I thought you would be the same." "I am not everyone," Elara signed firmly. "I am here. I will keep coming. Your father has given his permission. We can meet here in this room as often as I can make the journey. You are not alone anymore, Mihai. You will never be alone again." Mihai collapsed against her, his silent sobs shaking his small frame, and Elara held him the way she used to hold Anna, when the world had been too much for her sister to bear. She held him and let him cry, let him release 300 years of grief and loneliness and despair. And when his tears finally subsided, she signed to him about her conversation with his father, about the pain and guilt she had seen in the Count's ancient eyes, about the message he had asked her to deliver. Mihai's expression was complex as he processed this information, hope and skepticism warring on his face. "My father said that," he signed. "He remembered being human." "He did," Elara confirmed. "I think, beneath everything, he still loves you. He simply does not know how to show it anymore. Darkness has taken too much from him, but that does not mean you cannot find light in other places. That does not mean you cannot build a life worth living, even in the shadow of this castle." Mihai looked up at her with eyes that held centuries of suffering, but also now a fragile spark of hope. "Teach me," he signed. "Teach me how to find light in the darkness. Teach me how to live when everything inside me feels dead. You are the only person who has ever made me believe it might be possible." And so, as the moon tracked across the sky and the night deepened around them, Elara began to teach. She taught him about joy and small pleasures, about finding beauty in simple things, about building meaning from connection and compassion. She taught him that being seen and valued was not something that had to be earned, but something every soul deserved simply by virtue of existing. And she promised him that as long as she drew breath, he would have someone who chose to see him, who chose to stay, who chose to love him despite and because of everything he was. The seasons turned, and with them, the delicate balance within Castle Dracula shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Elara made the journey up the mountain path twice each week, carrying with her small tokens of the mortal world, bread still warm from the oven, wildflowers picked from mountain meadows, books borrowed from the village priest. Mihai received each gift with reverence, as if she were bringing him pieces of salvation itself. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the simple joy of connection into something richer and more complex. Mihai began to share not just his loneliness, but his observations, his thoughts about existence and immortality, and the nature of consciousness itself. 300 years of silent contemplation had given him insights that most philosophers would spend lifetimes seeking, and Elara found herself learning as much from him as he seemed to learn from her. The Count watched these developments with an expression that Elara could never quite decipher. Sometimes she would catch him standing in doorways, observing their signed conversations with something that might have been longing or regret. He never interrupted, never forbade, but his presence was always felt, a dark shadow at the edge of their fragile light. One evening in late spring, nearly 6 months after Elara's first visit to the castle, she arrived to find Mihai waiting for her in the courtyard rather than his tower room. His face was animated in a way she had never seen before, his movements quick and excited as he signed. "My father wishes to speak with you. He asked me to bring you to the library. He says he has something important to discuss." Elara felt a flutter of apprehension but nodded. She followed Mihai through the castle's labyrinthine corridors to a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books. The library was warmer than the rest of the castle, heated by a fire that crackled in an enormous hearth. The Count stood before a table covered in ancient texts, his long fingers resting on the open pages of a tome bound in cracked leather. He looked up as they entered, and Elara was startled to see that his expression held none of its usual coldness. Instead, there was something almost vulnerable in his ancient eyes. "Sit," he said, gesturing to chairs near the fire. "Both of you. What I have to say concerns you equally." They sat, Mihai's small hand finding Elara's, and holding tight. The Count remained standing, as if sitting would somehow diminish the gravity of what he had to say. "For 3 centuries, I have searched for a way to undo what I did to my son. I have consulted every grimoire, every dark text, every forbidden source of knowledge I could find. I sought to restore his voice, to complete his transformation, to give him the power and strength that should have been his. I failed in every attempt. The curse that binds him is beyond my ability to break." He paused, his gaze moving to Mihai with an expression of profound sorrow. "I told myself that I kept searching because I wanted to fix my mistake, to make him whole. But that was a lie I told myself to avoid facing the truth. I wanted to change him not for his sake but for mine. I wanted to erase the evidence of my failure, to transform him into something I could be proud of rather than accepting him as he is." The Count moved closer to the fire, and the light played across his pale features, casting shadows that made him look more human and more monstrous by turns. "You, Elara, in your simple mortal wisdom, understood something I could not grasp in 300 years of existence. You understood that Mihai does not need to be changed or fixed, or made into something else. He needs only to be seen and valued as he is. Your acceptance has done more for him than all my desperate attempts at transformation ever could." Mihai's hand tightened around Elara's, his eyes wide with shock. His father had never spoken to him like this, had never acknowledged him with such raw honesty. "I have spent these months watching you together," the Count continued, "watching my son come alive under your care, watching him discover joy and purpose, and the will to exist not merely to endure the passage of time, but to actually live within it. And I have been forced to confront something I have avoided for centuries, my own failure, not as a creator of vampires but as a father." He turned to face them fully, and in his eyes Elara saw tears that would never fall, grief that had calcified over the centuries into something harder than stone, but no less painful. "I cannot undo what I have done to him. I cannot give him back his mortality or his voice or his childhood, but I can give him something else. I can give him freedom." The Count crossed to Mihai and, in a gesture that seemed to cost him everything, knelt before his son, so that they were at eye level. "Mihai," he said, his voice rough with emotion he had not expressed in centuries, "I release you from my authority. You are no longer bound to this castle or to me. You may leave if you wish. You may stay if you choose. But the choice is yours, not mine. I have controlled enough of your existence. I will control it no longer. Mihai stared at his father, his hands frozen in mid-air, unable to form signs because his entire world had just shifted beneath him. The Count reached out slowly, carefully, as if approaching something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile, and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. I cannot be the father you deserved, the Count said quietly. I cannot give you warmth or light or any of the things that make existence bearable, but I can give you this, the right to choose your own path, the right to accept or reject my presence in your life, the right to build something new with this woman who has shown you more love in 6 months than I have managed in 3 centuries. Mihai's hands finally moved, trembling as they formed signs. You are my father. I have never wanted to leave you. I have only wanted you to see me. The Count's composure cracked, and for just a moment Elara saw the man he had been before darkness claimed him, a father holding his dying son, a man making a terrible choice out of love, a human being discovering too late that immortality could not save him from grief or regret or the consequences of his own actions. I see you, the Count said, his voice breaking. I see you now, and I am sorry. I am so profoundly sorry that it took a mortal girl to teach me what I should have known all along, that you were never a failure, that the love I had for you did not die when I transformed you. It only became buried beneath the weight of my own self-loathing and pride. Mihai stood and embraced his father, wrapping his small arms around the Count's neck. It was awkward and uncertain, 300 years of distance not easily bridged, but it was genuine. The Count held his son with a tenderness that seemed impossible from something that had committed such horrors, but Elara understood now that monsters and fathers could exist in the same being, that even the damned could carry fragments of love within their darkness. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son, vampire and cursed child, bound by blood and guilt and a love that had never truly died, but had only been waiting for someone brave enough to acknowledge it. When they finally separated, the Count turned to Elara. You have my gratitude, mortal. You have given my son something I could not, and in doing so you have given me something I thought lost forever, the chance to be, in some small way, a father again. What will you do now? Elara asked. What changes for Mihai? That is for him to decide, the Count said, but I will make you an offer. You are welcome in this castle not as a guest, but as family. You may come and go as you please. You may stay for days or weeks if you wish, and when your mortal life reaches its end, if you desire it, I will ensure your passing is peaceful and your body rests in consecrated ground rather than being lost to the mountain wilds. It was the closest thing to kindness the Count could offer, a promise that acknowledged her mortality while respecting it. Elara felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected generosity. Thank you, she said simply. The months that followed were unlike anything Elara could have imagined. She continued her work at the tavern, but she spent increasing amounts of time at the castle, teaching Mihai to read and write in multiple languages, exploring the vast library with him, sitting with him on the ramparts and watching the sun set over the mountains, careful always to retreat inside before true darkness fell and the sun's last rays vanished. The Count, true to his word, gave Mihai freedom to make his own choices. Some nights Mihai stayed in the castle with his father, and Elara would see them sitting together in the library, the Count reading aloud while Mihai listened with an expression of quiet contentment. Other times Mihai accompanied Elara back to the village, wrapped in cloaks and moving through the shadows, observing mortal life from a distance, but no longer completely separate from it. The villagers over time began to accept the strange pale boy, who appeared sometimes at Elara's side. They would never fully embrace him. Fear was too deeply ingrained, but they learned to nod in acknowledgement, to include him at the margins of their world. It was not full acceptance, but it was more than Mihai had ever known, and it was enough. Elara knew that her time was finite, that the years would pass, and age would claim her, while Mihai remained forever young. But she did not let that knowledge poison the present. She lived each day fully, teaching Mihai about joy and sorrow, about the bittersweet beauty of mortality, about the way finite time made every moment precious. And Mihai, in turn, taught her about patience and perspective, about finding meaning in repetition, about the strength it took to endure when endurance seemed impossible. The Count watched over them both with an expression that grew softer as the seasons passed. He would never be warm or kind in any conventional sense. His nature was too deeply rooted in darkness for that. But he learned, slowly and painfully, to express his love in the ways available to him. He protected them. He provided for them. He gave them space to build their bond without his interference. And sometimes, late at night, Elara would see him standing alone on the ramparts, staring out at the world he had renounced centuries ago, and she wondered if he was remembering what it felt like to be human, to love without the corruption of immortality, twisting that love into possession and control. Years passed. Elara's dark hair began to show threads of silver. Her face developed lines that spoke of laughter and tears and the fullness of a life well lived. Mihai remained unchanged, eternally 8 years old in appearance, but his eyes grew deeper, warmer, filled with experiences that gave his ancient soul something it had never possessed before: hope, purpose, love. On a spring evening, much like the one when she had first entered the castle, Elara sat with Mihai in the library, teaching him a new sign she had learned from a traveling merchant. The Count entered quietly and stood watching them with an expression she had learned to recognize as contentment. "You have given me a gift," he said suddenly. "Both of you. You have reminded me that even in darkness, even in damnation, there can be moments of grace. I am still a monster. I will always be a monster, but perhaps monsters can learn. Perhaps even the damned can be touched by something resembling redemption, not through divine forgiveness, but through the simple human act of choosing to do better, to be better, even when better is still so far from good." Elara met his gaze and saw in those ancient eyes something she had never expected to see: gratitude, not the cold acknowledgement of a debt owed, but genuine heartfelt thankfulness for what she had brought into his cursed existence. "You are not beyond redemption," she said softly. "You are just very far from it. But distance can be crossed one step at a time. You have taken the first steps. That matters." The Count smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look almost human, perhaps. Or perhaps I am simply a monster who has learned to mimic humanity well enough to fool even myself. But if that mimicry brings my son happiness, if it gives him a reason to embrace his existence rather than merely endure it, then I will continue the performance for however long I remain on this earth. "It is not a performance if you mean it," Elara said, "and I believe you do." That night, as Elara prepared to return to the village, Mihai walked with her to the castle gates. The moon was full and bright, painting the world in silver, and the spring air was soft with the promise of renewal. Mihai's hands moved in the moonlight, forming signs with practiced grace. "Thank you," he signed, "for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for speaking to me when I was silent, for teaching me that even a cursed existence can hold beauty and meaning. You have given me a life worth living. I will carry that gift with me through all the centuries to come." Elara knelt beside him, taking his cold hands in her warm ones one last time. "You were never invisible," she signed back. "You were always worth seeing. I just happened to be the one who looked." She kissed his forehead, a gesture of pure affection, and walked back down the mountain path toward the village lights. Behind her, father and son stood together at the castle gates, watching her go. The monster and the cursed child, the ancient vampire and his eternal son, bound together by blood and guilt and a love that had been broken and remade into something stronger for having been rebuilt. Years later, when Elara's mortal life finally came to its natural end, she died peacefully in her sleep with Mihai holding her hand. The Count kept his promise. She was buried in consecrated ground in the village cemetery, next to her sister Anna, with a headstone that read simply, "She taught us to see." Mihai mourned her as only an immortal could, with a grief that would last centuries. But he did not return to the darkness she had pulled him from. He carried her lessons with him, her compassion, her courage, her insistence that every soul deserved to be acknowledged and valued. He continued to visit the village, to observe the mortal world, to find small joys in the passage of seasons and the endurance of beauty. And the Count, standing at his son's side through the long years that followed, learned something he had not believed possible: that love could survive death. That redemption, even for the damned, was not about erasing the past, but about choosing every day to honor what had been given, to protect what remained, and to carry forward the light that one brave mortal girl had brought into their darkness. The castle on the mountain remained ancient and terrible, a monument to darkness and immortality. But within its cold walls, two cursed souls held onto a fragment of humanity, a memory of kindness, a testament to the truth that even the smallest acts of compassion could echo through eternity and change the unchangeable. And sometimes on spring evenings when the moon was full and bright, the villagers would see a small figure standing on the castle ramparts, his hands moving in patterns they did not understand, signing words into the night air as if the wind itself could carry them to someone who had long since passed beyond hearing. But Mihai knew she could hear him somehow, somewhere in whatever place held the souls of the truly good, and so he signed to her across the distance between death and immortality, between mortal warmth and eternal cold, between the light she had carried and the darkness he continued to endure. "Thank you," his hands said to the stars and the moon and the memory of her smile. "Thank you for teaching me that silence could speak, that monsters could learn to love, that even in the deepest darkness, a single act of kindness could create light enough to last forever." And in the village below, life continued, unaware that somewhere in the castle above, a curse had been broken, not through magic or power, but through the simple revolutionary act of one person choosing to see another, choosing to stay when everyone else had walked away, choosing to love what the world had deemed unlovable. It was enough. It had always been enough, and it would echo through all the centuries to come. A quiet testimony to the truth that compassion, once given, never truly dies but lives on in the hearts and souls of those it touches, immortal in its own way, eternal in its own right. Proof that even the damned can be saved not from their curse but within it.